While you're doing that, I'll tell you a story about an old cowboy who came into a upscale church. He was dressed in his usual cowboy fare, dirty boots, torn jeans, mud-splattered shirt, dusty hat. He sat at the back of this church and listened for the service. After the service was over, the pastor came down to him and said, I want you to go home and ask God what he thinks you should wear to a church like this. Next Sunday, same service, same pew, same cowboy, same clothes. Pastor gave the service again, and afterwards came down and said, didn't I ask you to ask God what he thought you should wear to this service? And the cowboy said, I did. And the minister said, well, what was the answer? The cowboy said, he doesn't know, he's never been here. Keep that in mind for a minute while we're doing this. Luke chapter 15 tells about the parables. And one of the most famous of all is the parable of the prodigal son. Now, when I was in Sunday school and growing up, I was always under the impression that this was about the son. The son who left home after taking his inheritance from his father and then leaving home, spending it all on wine, women, song, whatever, on so-called friends until everything was gone. And then having no money, he had to take whatever job he could get, which happened to be feeding pigs for a Gentile farmer, until he decided to finally come home to the house where he belonged. Now, I always thought it was about the son, and it is to some extent, obviously. Then, as I found out more about it, it's actually more about the father than it is about the son. The father who loved his son so much that he kept watching for him every day. And then when he finally saw him after months, years of waiting, ran out to meet him. Now, if you picture, in those days, men had long gowns on. So he'd have to hitch up this gown in his hands and run. Something that a dignified man would not be found doing very often in those days. But he loved this boy so much that when he came back, this is how he greeted him. And this has always been one where the father represents God and the son represents those of us who leave and come back. But if you look closely at the story, there is a third person in this story. Sometimes he gets neglected. But in many ways, he's the most important person in the story. You see, it says at the start of this that the father had two sons, and one of them, the younger, said, give me that which is mine. You don't get inheritance until usually the person who gives the inheritance is dead. He was saying to his father, I wish you were dead and give me my money. But the father did this, but he also did it to the other child as well. He divided unto them his living. So literally, he himself had no possessions left. He had given all his possessions to his two sons. At the end of the story, after the prodigal son returns home, the older son was in the field when he heard music and dancing. And when he found out what was there, he became angry. It would not go in. He answered and said to his father, "Many years do I serve you, and I never transgressed or broke one of your commandments. But you gave your younger son the fatted calf. You never did it for me." Now picture this. The father represents God. The younger son represents those of us who have left and gone astray. Who does the older son represent? He said, "I have always been with you. I have always been with you." So he was therefore, in the parable, always with God. Who is he? The father said to the son, "You are ever with me, and all that is mine is yours." So, for a moment, go back to Matthew, chapter 25. Maybe chapter 28, sorry. I lost the chapter here, but anyway. It says, he was talking to the Pharisees. And he tells them, "On the outward you are like whitewashed sepulchres, but on the inside you are deceitful and not clean." He talks about them being unfaithful. He talks about them being angry and sons of perdition. The older son really represents the Pharisees, who are always with God, who have been with God all their lives, but never really appreciated what they had. We are like the Pharisees in many ways. We are like the ones who are with God, who are in churches, and often don't really appreciate what we have. God said to the older son, "Everything I have is yours." If we are sons of God, we are joint heirs with Christ, and therefore everything God has is ours. But how many times do we present ourselves very cynical to people, very unpleasing to people? We get ourselves in churches, in buildings, which are very whitewashed on the outside, but very self-centered on the inside. And like the old cowboy that comes in, is God really sometimes in the churches? We have to be more appreciative of what God has done for us and how He welcomes anyone back into the fold, and rejoice with Him when people come back. Not be angry, not be indignant, not be feeling that we are entitled to things in our own way. We have to stop acting more like Pharisees in many ways, and more like the prodigal, who comes back to Christ, who is welcomed with open arms by the one who loves us all. Many churches close these days, and many times it may be because of the fact that God is no longer there. And that's just something to think about.